Hey everyone, I'm Peter Stories, here to guide you today. If you use this video to drift off to sleep, please tap like, hit subscribe, and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from and what time it is there. Now, settle in, get cozy, and let yourself relax. My name is Henry Wilson and I am 41 years old. I've been a park ranger at Great Smoky Mountains National Park for 15 years. This happened during the fall of 2023, when the missing person case of Marcus Chen turned into something that still haunts me. The radio crackled to life at 4:17 p.m., just as the October sun was beginning its rapid descent behind the ridgeline. Unit 12, we have a missing person report. Male, 28. Last seen on the Appalachian Trail near Klingman's Dome around noon. Name is Marcus Chen from Seattle. His girlfriend Rebecca waiting at the visitor center. I pressed the transmit button, my breath visible in the crisp autumn air. Copy that, dispatch. I'm 20 minutes out from Klingman's Dome. Any description? 5'10", black hair, wearing a red North Face jacket and gray hiking boots. Experienced hiker, but girlfriend says he's been acting strange lately. Nightmares, talking about voices in the woods. The last part made me pause. In 15 years, I'd worked dozens of missing person cases. Most were simple, hikers who'd wandered off trail, gotten turned around, or injured themselves. But the ones that mentioned behavioral changes beforehand, those were the cases that kept me awake at night. I radioed for backup and began the drive up the winding mountain road. The fall colors were at their peak, brilliant reds and golds that should have been beautiful. Instead, they looked like flames consuming the mountainside. Dead leaves swirled across my windshield in the wind, and I could smell the approaching cold front through my open window. By the time I reached the trailhead, dusk was settling into the valleys like spilled ink. I met Rebecca Chen in the parking lot, a petite woman with worry lines etched deep around her eyes. She'd been crying. "He's been having these dreams," she said, wrapping her arms around herself. "For 3 weeks now. Always the same thing. Voices calling his name from the woods. He said they sounded like children, but wrong somehow. He came here to face whatever was calling him." I felt the familiar chill that had nothing to do with the October air. Did he mention any specific location, any landmark he was drawn to? He kept talking about a place where the trail splits in 3 directions. Said he'd dreamed about it. She showed me a photo on her phone. Marcus grinning at the camera, but his eyes looked haunted even in the bright sunlight. He left his phone in the car, said he didn't want any distractions. I handed her my card and assured her we'd find him, though something in my gut was already screaming warnings. As she drove away, I shouldered my pack and clicked on my headlamp. The beam cut through the growing darkness, illuminating the familiar trail markers that led toward Klingman's Dome. The first hour of searching was routine. I followed the main trail, calling Marcus's name every few minutes and scanning for any sign of his red jacket. The autumn night was unnaturally quiet. No owl calls, no rustling of small animals in the underbrush. Even the wind seemed muted, as if the forest itself was holding its breath. At 6:30 p.m. I reached the first trail junction. This wasn't the 3-way split Rebecca had mentioned, but something caught my eye. Fresh boot prints in the mud, size 10 or 11, leading off the main trail toward an old unmarked path that I'd never noticed before. I radioed my position and began following the prints. The path was barely visible, overgrown with dying ferns and littered with fallen branches. My headlamp beam danced across the trees, creating shifting shadows that seemed to move independently of the light. 20 minutes later, I found his jacket. The red North Face was hanging from a branch about 8 feet off the ground, far too high for someone to have simply dropped it. The fabric was torn, but not in a way that suggested an animal attack. The tears were deliberate, forming strange patterns that made my skin crawl. I photographed the jacket and called it in. Unit 12 to dispatch. Found the missing person's jacket on an unmarked trail about half a mile southeast of junction marker 7, requesting additional units and a K9 team. The radio crackled back with static, then silence. I tried again. Dispatch, this is Unit 12. Do you copy? Nothing but white noise. I checked my radio, full battery, correct frequency. My cell phone showed no signal, which wasn't unusual this deep in the park. But the radio silence was wrong. We had repeaters throughout this section of the mountain. I continued following the trail, Marcus's boot prints still visible in the soft earth. The path began to descend into a hollow I'd never explored before, despite 15 years of working these mountains. The trees grew thicker here, their branches forming a canopy so dense that my headlamp barely penetrated 10 feet ahead. That's when I started hearing the voices. At first I thought it was the wind through the trees, but as I stopped to listen, the sounds became more distinct. Children's voices, high and sweet, singing something that might have been a lullaby. The melody was beautiful and wrong at the same time, like a music box with a broken mechanism. "Marcus," I called out, my voice echoing strangely in the hollow. "Marcus Chen, if you can hear me, respond." The singing stopped abruptly. The silence that followed was absolute. No insects, no wind, no distant highway noise. Even my own breathing seemed muffled. I pressed forward, following the boot prints deeper into the hollow. The path began to curve, and I realized I was walking in a spiral, gradually descending toward some central point. My compass needle spun wildly, unable to find magnetic north. After what felt like hours but was probably only 30 minutes, I reached the bottom of the hollow. There, in a clearing surrounded by ancient oaks, I found the three-way trail split that Rebecca had described. But this wasn't on any park map I'd ever seen. More disturbing were the other items scattered around the clearing. A child's yellow rain boot, a woman's purse, the leather cracked and weathered, a man's watch, its face cracked and hands frozen at 3:33. These weren't recent, some looked decades old. In the center of the clearing stood a single dead tree, its bark stripped away to reveal pale, bone-white wood. And at its base, sitting with his back against the trunk, was Marcus Chen. He was alive but motionless, staring straight ahead with unblinking eyes. His lips moved constantly, but no sound came out. His hands were pressed flat against the earth on either side of him, fingers splayed wide. "Marcus!" I rushed toward him but stopped when I noticed his boot prints. They led to the tree, but they also led away from it, in 3 different directions, following each of the branching paths. I knelt beside him and checked his pulse. Strong and steady, but his skin was ice cold. His eyes didn't track my movement, didn't even seem to register my presence. Up close, I could see his lips forming words, over and over. "They're waiting. They're waiting. They're waiting." I tried my radio again. This time, instead of static, I heard something worse. The children's voices singing through the speaker. The same broken lullaby I'd heard in the woods. "Marcus, can you hear me?" I shook his shoulder gently. "I'm Sarah, I'm a park ranger. Your girlfriend Rebecca is worried about you." For a moment, his eyes focused on mine. When he spoke, his voice was barely a whisper. "They showed me the other ones. The ones who came before. They're all still here, Henry. They're all still waiting." "Who's waiting, Marcus? Who showed you?" "The children. But they're not children anymore. They haven't been children for a very long time." His gaze drifted back to the dead tree. "They chose this place. They chose me. And now they're going to choose you." The singing started again, but now it was coming from all around us. I spun my headlamp beam in a circle, trying to locate the source. The light caught movement in the trees, small figures darting between the trunks, always just at the edge of visibility. I needed to get Marcus out of there. I tried to lift him, but he was impossibly heavy, as if he'd become part of the earth itself. His fingers had pressed so deeply into the soil that I couldn't see them anymore. "Marcus, we need to leave now." He laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "Leave? You can't leave. None of us can leave. We're part of the waiting now." That's when I saw them clearly for the first time. They emerged from the tree line, 3 figures that might have been children once, but were something else now. Their faces were pale and elongated, with eyes that reflected my headlamp beam like an animal's. They wore the tattered remains of clothing from different eras: a Victorian dress, a 1950s Boy Scout uniform, a modern t-shirt and jeans. The one in the dress spoke first. her voice the crystalline tone of a music box ballerina. "Hello, Henry. We've been waiting for you." I backed away, my hand moving instinctively to my service weapon. "I'm a federal park ranger. You need to step back and identify yourselves." The Boy Scout laughed, a sound like wind chimes in a hurricane. "Federal? We predate your federation by centuries. We predate your park by millennia. This was our place before your kind gave it a name." The third figure, the one in modern clothes, stepped closer. I could see now that it had once been a young girl, maybe 8 years old, but her smile was full of teeth that were too sharp, too many. "Marcus told us about you, about how you save people, but you can't save anyone here, Henry. You can only join them." I drew my weapon, though I wasn't sure bullets would do any good against whatever these things were. "I'm taking Marcus and leaving. Don't try to stop me." The Victorian girl tilted her head, the movement unnaturally fluid. "But you misunderstand. Marcus doesn't want to leave. None of them do. They're happy here in the waiting. They're safe from the pain of the world above." She gestured to the dead tree, and I saw them then. Faces in the bark, dozens of them, all with the same peaceful expression as Marcus. Men, women, children, all different ages and from different time periods, all pressed into the white wood like photographs. Every missing person case you've worked, Henry. Every hiker who vanished without a trace. They're all here, waiting with us. And now Marcus has joined them. I looked back at Marcus. His body was sinking into the earth, already buried up to his elbows. The peaceful expression on his face was identical to those in the tree. "They come to us," the Boy Scout said. "The ones who hear our song. The ones who are tired of carrying their burdens. We take away their pain, their fear, their loneliness. We give them peace." "That's not peace," I said, my voice shaking. "That's death." The modern girl's smile widened impossibly. "Is it? Look at them, Henry. Have you ever seen such contentment? Such serenity? They're free from the weight of existence. They're finally home." I had to make a decision. I could try to dig Marcus out, but he was already too deep, and something told me he wouldn't come willingly. Or I could run, try to escape this place and warn others. But as I backed toward the path I'd come from, I realized it was gone. The clearing was now surrounded by solid forest, no gaps between the trees. The 3 paths that led away from the dead tree were the only way out. "Choose," the Victorian girl said. "Left leads to the highway, but you'll never reach it. Right leads to the visitor center, but it's been abandoned for 50 years. Straight leads deeper into our domain where the others wait." I tried my radio one more time. Instead of the children singing, I heard my own voice coming through the speaker. "They're all still here, Henry. They're all still waiting." The 3 figures began to circle me, their movements hypnotic. The singing started again, but now it was coming from the tree itself, from the faces pressed into the bark. Marcus's voice had joined the chorus. "You've spent so many years trying to save people," the Boy Scout said, "but you can't save them from what they truly want. You can't save them from peace." My vision began to blur. The weight of my pack felt enormous, the weight of my responsibilities crushing. How many missing person cases had I worked? How many families had I disappointed? How many times had I failed to bring someone home? "Let go, Henry," the modern girl whispered. "Let go of the burden. Let go of the pain. Join us in the waiting." I felt my knees buckle. The singing was so beautiful, so peaceful. It would be so easy to just sit down, to press my hands into the earth, to let the weight of the world drain away. But then I thought of Rebecca Chen, waiting for news of Marcus. I thought of all the other families who'd never gotten answers, who'd never known what happened to their loved ones, and I thought of the other rangers who would come looking for me. I forced myself to stand, to move. I chose the left path, the one that supposedly led to the highway. As I stumbled forward, the children's voices rose in anger behind me. "You can't leave," the Victorian girl shrieked. "No one leaves. You'll be back, Henry Wilson. You'll hear our song in your dreams and you'll come back to us." I ran through the forest, branches tearing at my clothes, my headlamp beam bouncing wildly. The path seemed to go on forever, winding through impossible geography. I passed the same landmarks over and over: a fallen log, a distinctive rock formation, a creek that shouldn't exist. Then suddenly, I burst out of the tree line onto the familiar trail near Klingman's Dome. My radio crackled to life with normal dispatch chatter. My cell phone showed full signal. I ran to my patrol vehicle and called in backup. Search teams, everything we had. But when we returned to the area at dawn, we found nothing. No unmarked trail, no hollow, no three-way split. Just the normal forest, with Marcus Chen's red jacket hanging from a branch exactly where I'd left it. The official report stated that Marcus Chen had fallen from a cliff face about 2 miles from where his jacket was found. His body was recovered 3 days later, and the cause of death was ruled accidental. The case was closed. But I know the truth. I know what's waiting in that hollow that exists between the spaces on our maps. And I know that someday, when the burden becomes too heavy, when the failures pile up too high, I'll hear that singing again. I've had the dreams every night since then. The children's voices calling my name, promising peace, promising an end to the weight of responsibility. Sometimes I wake up with dirt under my fingernails, though I can't remember how it got there. Last week we had another missing person case, a young woman named Amanda Parker, last seen hiking alone near Klingman's Dome. Her boyfriend said she'd been having nightmares about voices in the woods. I volunteered to lead the search team, even though part of me knows what we'll find, or rather, what we won't find. Amanda is with them now, in the waiting. She's at peace, and every day the singing gets a little louder, a little more beautiful. Every day the burden gets a little heavier. Every day I understand a little more why Marcus chose to stay. The worst part is that I'm starting to envy him. I've been a park ranger for 15 years, and I've learned that some people don't want to be saved. Some people want to disappear. Some people want to stop carrying the weight of the world. But I also know that for every missing person who chooses to vanish, there are others who are. My name is Oliver Bailey, and I am 34 years old. I've been a park ranger at Olympic National Park for 12 years. This happened during the fall of 2023, when the missing person case of Emma Collins turned into something that still haunts me. The radio crackled to life at 6:47 p.m., just as the October sun began its rapid descent behind the towering Douglas firs. I was finishing my evening patrol of the Hoh River Trail when dispatch came through with the call I'd been dreading all season. Ranger Bailey, we have a missing person report. 23-year-old female Emma Collins last seen at the Marymere Falls trailhead approximately 4 hours ago. Family reports she was hiking alone. I pressed the transmit button, my breath visible in the suddenly frigid air. Copy that, dispatch. I'm 15 minutes from Marymere. Any description of clothing or equipment? Red jacket, dark jeans, carrying a small day pack. No overnight gear reported. Family says she's an experienced hiker but unfamiliar with the Olympic Peninsula. Another solo hiker. Another family that would spend the night wondering if their loved one was lying injured somewhere in the 922,000 acres of wilderness that had become my responsibility. I'd been through this drill countless times, but something about the approaching darkness and the way the wind suddenly stilled made my skin crawl. The Olympic Peninsula in October is unforgiving. Temperatures drop 20 degrees after sunset, and the rainforest becomes a maze of shadows and mist. Most tourists clear out by late September, leaving only the hardcore hikers and the locals who know better than to venture far from marked trails after dark. I radioed my partner, Kevin King, who was stationed at the Solduke entrance. Kevin, you copy that missing person report? Static filled the channel for several seconds before his voice came through, strained and distant. Copy, Oliver. I'm about 30 minutes out. Should I grab the thermal imaging gear? Affirmative. Meet me at the Marymere parking area. We'll start with a standard search pattern and expand if necessary. What I didn't tell Kevin was that this was the 4th missing person case in 3 weeks. The other 3 had been found, if you could call what we found finding them. Marcus Chen had been discovered sitting by Lake Crescent, staring at the water with vacant eyes, claiming he'd only been gone for an hour when he'd been missing for 36. Rebecca Hall was found walking in circles on the same 100-yard stretch of trail, her clothes soaked through despite no rain for days, and Jennifer Martinez. Jennifer still hadn't spoken a word since we pulled her from the old growth grove, her fingernails caked with dirt, and her eyes holding something that made even the most experienced rangers look away. The brass had chalked it up to seasonal effects. Hypothermia, dehydration, the disorientation that comes from being lost in dense forest. But I'd been working these woods for over a decade, and I'd never seen anything like it. There was something wrong with the way they'd been found, something that made my gut twist every time I thought about it. I reached the Marymere parking area just as the last traces of daylight faded from the sky. Emma Collins' silver Honda Civic sat alone under the flickering light of the area's single lamppost, its windows already fogging with condensation. I pulled on my headlamp and approached the vehicle, noting the Washington state plates and the rental car barcode stuck to the rear window. The car was locked, but I could see a purse on the passenger seat and a Washington state park map folded open on the dashboard. Through the windshield, I could make out the red circle she'd drawn around Marymere Falls, and a second circle around something called Whispering Woods, a name that made my blood run cold. There was no such place on any official park map. I'd been stationed at Olympic for 12 years, and I'd never heard of anywhere called Whispering Woods. Yet there it was, circled in red ink about 2 miles northeast of the falls, in an area that was supposed to be nothing but dense old growth and impassable undergrowth. I keyed my radio. "Dispatch, this is Ranger Bailey. I'm at the Marymere parking area. Subject's vehicle is present and secured. I'm going to start the preliminary search while I wait for backup." "Copy that, Ranger Bailey. Be advised that Weather Service is calling for heavy fog moving in from the coast. Visibility may be severely limited within the hour." Perfect, as if searching for a missing person in the Olympic rainforest after dark wasn't challenging enough. Now I'd be doing it blind. I shouldered my pack, checked my emergency beacon, and headed toward the trailhead. The Marymere Falls Trail is usually a simple 1-mile hike through temperate rainforest, popular with families and casual hikers. But at night, with the fog beginning to roll in and the temperature dropping toward freezing, it became something else entirely. The moss-covered big-leaf maples took on grotesque shapes in my headlamp beam, and the sound of my boots on the wooden boardwalk echoed unnaturally in the stillness. I'd walked this trail hundreds of times, but tonight it felt different. The familiar landmarks seemed slightly off, as if someone had moved them a few feet to the left or right. The wooden bridges spanning the creek appeared longer than they should be, and the interpretive signs cast shadows that looked like crouching figures. "Emma!" I called out, my voice swallowed by the thick air. "Emma Collins, can you hear me?" Nothing but the distant sound of the falls and the soft drip of condensation from the overhead branches. I continued forward, sweeping my flashlight beam back and forth across the trail, looking for any sign of disturbance. About halfway to the falls, I found it. A red thread caught on a salmonberry bush, exactly the color of the jacket Emma had been wearing. I bagged it carefully and marked the GPS coordinates, then noticed something that made my skin crawl. Footprints, fresh ones made by hiking boots, leading off the main trail and into the dense undergrowth. But these weren't the chaotic, panicked prints of someone who had gotten lost. They were perfectly spaced, deliberate, as if Emma had simply decided to walk into the forest with no destination in mind. I followed the prints for about 50 yards, pushing through devil's club and ferns that should have been impassable for someone of Emma's size. The prints led to a small clearing I'd never seen before, despite having worked this area for over a decade. In the center of the clearing stood a single Douglas fir, ancient and massive, its trunk scarred with symbols that looked like they'd been carved decades ago. But it was what lay at the base of the tree that made me reach for my radio with shaking hands. Emma's day pack sitting upright and perfectly positioned as if she'd carefully placed it there before continuing on. I approached cautiously, my hand resting on the grip of my service weapon. The pack was empty except for a water bottle and a granola bar, both unopened. But tucked into the side pocket was a folded piece of paper, a map, hand-drawn in the same red ink I'd seen in her car. It showed the Olympic Peninsula, but not as I knew it. Rivers flowed in the wrong directions, mountains appeared where there should be valleys, and trails connected places that were miles apart. And there, in the center of the map, was a detailed drawing of the clearing where I now stood. But in the drawing, the clearing was full of people. Dozens of them, all facing the carved tree, all perfectly still. At the bottom of the map, in Emma's handwriting, were the words, They're waiting for me. I keyed my radio, my voice barely steady. Kevin, what's your ETA? I found the subject's pack, but something's not right here. Static, then more static. Then a voice that sounded like Kevin's but distorted, as if it were coming from very far away. Oliver, can you hear the whispers? Kevin, you're breaking up. Repeat your last transmission. The whispers, Oliver. They're saying your name. I clicked off the radio and stood perfectly still, listening. At first there was nothing but the normal sounds of the forest, the drip of moisture, the distant crash of the falls, the soft rustle of wind through the canopy. But then, just at the edge of my hearing, I caught it. Whispers. Human voices, speaking just too quietly to make out the words. They seemed to be coming from everywhere and nowhere at once, carried on the fog that was now rolling into the clearing like a living thing. I grabbed Emma's pack and started back toward the main trail, but the whispers followed me. They grew louder as I pushed through the undergrowth, more insistent, and I began to make out individual words. Oliver. Stay. Join us. Forever. By the time I reached the trail, I was running. My rational mind told me it was just the wind, just the disorientation that comes from being alone in the forest after dark. But my gut, the instinct that had kept me alive through 12 years of wilderness work, was screaming that I needed to get out of there immediately. I made it back to the parking area just as Kevin's patrol truck pulled in. He climbed out slowly, his movements stiff and unnatural, and I saw that his eyes were completely black. Kevin? I approached cautiously, my hand moving to my weapon. You okay, buddy? He turned toward me, and when he smiled, I saw that his teeth were stained with something dark. Found her, Oliver. Emma's waiting for you. She's with the others now. What others, Kevin? Where is she? In the Whispering Woods, where they all go eventually. His voice was flat, emotionless, as if he were reading from a script. She's been asking for you specifically. Says she has something to show you. I backed away, my heart hammering against my ribs. Kevin, I need you to call for backup. Something's wrong here, really wrong. Nothing's wrong, Oliver. Everything's exactly as it should be, as it's always been. He reached into his truck and pulled out a coil of rope. Emma's waiting. She doesn't like to be kept waiting. I drew my weapon, though every instinct told me it wouldn't do any good. Kevin, stop. That's not you talking. I don't know what's happening here, but I need you to fight it. He laughed, a sound like breaking glass. Fight it? Why would I fight it? Do you know how long I've been carrying this burden, Oliver? How many years I've had to pretend to care about lost hikers and missing persons? Now I don't have to pretend anymore. The fog rolled in around us, thick and unnatural, carrying the whispers with it. I could hear them clearly now. Dozens of voices, all speaking in unison. Bring him to us, Kevin. Bring him to the woods. I ran. I'm not proud of it, but I ran. Behind me, I could hear Kevin's laughter echoing through the fog and the sound of his boots as he followed. I made it to my truck and gunned the engine, tires spinning on the wet pavement as I accelerated toward the park entrance. But the road was wrong. Instead of the familiar two-lane highway that led back to Port Angeles, I found myself on a narrow dirt track that wound deeper into the forest. The GPS on my dashboard showed nothing but static, and my radio produced only the sound of those whispers growing louder with each passing mile. I drove for what felt like hours, but my watch showed that only minutes had passed. The forest on either side of the road grew denser, more oppressive until the trees seemed to be leaning in over the track. And then, suddenly, I was back at the Marymere parking area, as if I'd never left. Kevin's truck was gone, but Emma's Honda was still there, and now there were others. Cars and trucks I didn't recognize, some that looked like they'd been sitting there for years. I counted at least a dozen vehicles, all with the same thin layer of condensation on their windows, all empty. I tried the radio again. Dispatch, this is Ranger Bailey. I have an emergency at Marymere Falls. I need immediate backup and a full search and rescue team. The response came through clearly, but it was all wrong. Ranger Bailey, this is dispatch. There is no emergency at Marymere Falls. There is no missing person named Emma Collins. Return to your station immediately. That's impossible. I have her pack right here and her car is in the parking lot. Ranger Bailey, you are experiencing stress-related hallucinations. Report to the medical station immediately for evaluation. I clicked off the radio and stared at Emma's pack, still sitting in my passenger seat. It was real. The red thread was real. The map with its impossible geography was real. Whatever was happening here, it was bigger than one missing hiker. I grabbed my emergency kit and headed back toward the trail, but this time I was ready. I'd brought extra batteries, emergency flares, and most importantly, a GPS tracking device that would record my exact route, regardless of what my eyes told me I was seeing. The trail looked normal at first, but as I progressed toward the falls, I began to notice changes. The wooden bridges were definitely longer than they should be, stretching across chasms that hadn't existed earlier. The interpretive signs now bore messages I'd never seen before. Welcome to the Whispering Woods. Population growing. Lost? You're exactly where you need to be. The others are waiting just ahead. I documented everything with my camera, though I had a sinking feeling that the photos would show nothing but normal park signage. The whispers had started again, but now I could make out the words clearly. Oliver Bailey, age 34, park ranger for 12 years. We know you, Oliver. We've been waiting for you. I followed the trail to the clearing where I'd found Emma's pack, but now it was different. The single Douglas fir had been joined by others, forming a rough circle around the carved tree, and standing between them, perfectly still, were people. I recognized Kevin immediately, though he was facing away from me, staring at the central tree with the same vacant expression I'd seen on the other recovered hikers. Next to him stood a woman in a red jacket. Emma Collins, I presumed, though I couldn't see her face. There were others, too. Dozens of them, all standing in perfect formation, all facing the tree. Men and women of various ages, all wearing hiking gear, all with that same unnatural stillness. At the far edge of the group, I could see Marcus Chen, Rebecca Hall, and Jennifer Martinez, the 3 hikers who'd been found earlier this month. Only now, they looked different. Their skin had a waxy, translucent quality, and their eyes were completely black. As I watched, Emma slowly turned toward me. Her face was pale, almost luminescent in the fog, and when she smiled, I saw that her teeth were stained the same dark color as Kevin's. Oliver, she said, her voice carrying impossibly well across the clearing. I've been waiting for you. We all have. Emma, I'm here to help you. We need to get you back to the parking area, back to your family. She laughed, a sound like wind chimes in a hurricane. My family? I don't remember having a family. I remember the road and the map, and the voice that told me to come here. But that was someone else, wasn't it? Someone who used to be me. Listen to me, Emma. You're Emma Collins from Seattle. You're 23 years old and you're a graduate student at the University of Washington. Your parents are worried sick about you. Those were just details, like the clothes I was wearing or the car I was driving. None of it was real, none of it mattered. This is real, Oliver. This is where I belong. She gestured toward the carved tree, and I saw that the symbols weren't carved into the bark. They were growing from within it, pulsing with a faint phosphorescent light. As I watched, new symbols appeared, writing themselves in a language I didn't recognize but somehow understood. The woods are hungry, Oliver. They've been hungry for so long, and we're the only ones who can feed them. Each person who comes here, each person who joins us, makes the woods stronger. Soon they'll be strong enough to reach beyond the park boundaries. This is insane. You're all sick or drugged or something, but you're not lost. I can help you get back. Kevin turned around then, and I saw that his face was changing. His features were becoming less defined, more generic, as if he were slowly forgetting how to be human. When he spoke, his voice was a chorus of all the whispers I'd been hearing. There is no back, Oliver. There is only forward, only deeper, only surrender. The entire group began to move toward me, slowly and deliberately. I backed away, but the clearing seemed to stretch as I moved, always keeping them at the same distance. I tried to run, but my legs felt like they were moving through thick water. You can't leave, Oliver, Emma said, her voice now coming from everywhere at once. The woods won't let you. They've been calling to you for years, haven't they? Every missing person case, every unexplained disappearance, you felt it then, didn't you, the pull? She was right. I had felt it. Every time I'd found a lost hiker, every time I'd brought someone back from the wilderness, there had been a part of me that wanted to keep walking, to see what lay beyond the marked trails. I'd chalked it up to curiosity, to the natural wanderlust that had made me choose this profession. But now I realized it had been something else entirely. The woods chose you a long time ago, Emma continued, her face now just inches from mine, though I couldn't remember her getting closer. They've been patient, letting you play your role, letting you bring them offerings, but now it's time for you to stop pretending to be separate from them. I reached for my radio, but it was gone. My gun was gone. Even my emergency beacon had vanished. I was alone in the clearing with dozens of people who were no longer quite human, and the fog was getting thicker. "What do you want from me?" I whispered. "Join us," they said in unison, their voices harmonizing in ways that human voices shouldn't be able to. "Feed the woods. Help them grow. Help them spread. And if I refuse?" Emma smiled, and I saw that her teeth were now pointed, sharpened to predatory points. "You can't refuse, Oliver. You're already here. You're already part of it. The only choice is whether you fight it or accept it." I felt something warm trickling down my face and wiped it away. My hand came back covered in blood, and I realized that symbols were carving themselves into my forehead, just like the ones on the tree. "No," I said, more to myself than to them. "No, this isn't real. This is some kind of hallucination or gas leak or—" "It's real," Kevin said, his voice now completely unrecognizable. "It's the most real thing you've ever experienced. Everything else, your job, your life, your memories, those were the illusions. This is truth." The world around me began to shift and change. The forest grew denser, more primal, as if I were seeing it as it truly was for the first time. The trees were alive in a way that had nothing to do with biology, and they were hungry. They had been feeding on lost hikers for decades, maybe centuries, growing stronger with each person who disappeared into their depths. "You understand now," Emma said, her voice full of compassion that somehow made everything worse. "You understand what we are, what we've become. You understand what you're going to become." I tried to scream, but no sound came out. I tried to run, but my legs wouldn't obey. I could only stand there as the forest closed in around me, as the whispers grew louder and more insistent, as the symbols on my forehead burned with cold fire. And then, suddenly, I was back in my truck. I was sitting in the driver's seat, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly that my knuckles were white. My radio was crackling with normal traffic, and my watch showed that it was 11:47 p.m. I looked around frantically. I was in the Marymere parking area, just as before, but now there was only one car, Emma's Honda Civic, exactly where I'd first seen it. Kevin's truck was nowhere to be seen, and the dozen other vehicles I'd counted earlier had vanished. I grabbed my radio with shaking hands. "Dispatch, this is Ranger Bailey. I need to report a missing person at Marymere Falls. Emma Collins, age 23, red jacket, dark jeans." "Copy that, Ranger Bailey. This is the first report we've received. What's your status?" "I'm at the parking area. The subject's vehicle is present. I'm going to begin a preliminary search." "Negative, Ranger Bailey. We're sending a full search team. ETA 15 minutes. Wait for backup." I looked at myself in the rearview mirror and saw that my forehead was unmarked. There were no symbols, no blood, no sign of what I'd experienced, but I could still feel them, carved into my skin like invisible scars. 15 minutes later, the search team arrived. Kevin King pulled up in his truck, looking perfectly normal, and climbed out with the thermal imaging equipment. He showed no sign of recognition, no memory of our encounter in the clearing. "Oliver," he said, his voice completely human. "Rough night for a search. You okay? You look like you've seen a ghost." "I'm fine," I lied. "Just tired." We conducted the search by the book. We found Emma's pack in the clearing exactly where I'd found it before, but the carved tree was gone. In its place stood a perfectly normal Douglas fir, unmarked and unremarkable. The map I'd found was just a standard Park Service trail map, with no red circles or impossible geography. We found Emma at dawn, sitting by the lake, staring at the water with vacant eyes. She claimed she'd only been gone for an hour, despite being missing for over 12 hours. She had no memory of how she'd gotten to the lake, no recollection of the Whispering Woods or the clearing or any of the people I'd seen there. The medical team cleared her as physically unharmed but recommended psychological evaluation for the memory loss. Her family was grateful, the case was closed, and everything went back to normal. Except it didn't. 3 weeks later, Marcus Chen disappeared again. This time we found him in a completely different part of the park, with the same vacant stare and the same missing hours. Rebecca Hall followed 2 weeks after that, and then Jennifer Martinez. Each time they were found in a different location, always sitting by water, always staring. And each time they remembered less of who they used to be. Emma Collins stopped returning her family's calls. Marcus Chen quit his job and moved into a cabin near the park. Rebecca Hall and Jennifer Martinez simply vanished one day, leaving no trace. I tried to tell my supervisors about the pattern, about the connection between the cases, but they attributed it to seasonal depression and the stress of wilderness living. I tried to investigate on my own, but every time I approached the areas where I'd found the missing hikers, the whispers would start again. Oliver Bailey, age 34, park ranger for 12 years. We're still waiting for you. I put in for a transfer, but it was denied. I requested early retirement, but the paperwork disappeared. I tried to quit outright, but somehow I kept showing up for work, kept patrolling the trails, kept searching for missing persons. Because that's what I do. That's what I've always done. I search for people who are lost and I bring them back to where they belong. And the woods are patient. They've been patient for so long, and they can wait a little longer. They know that eventually I'll stop fighting. Eventually I'll accept what I am, what I've always been. A shepherd, leading the flock to slaughter. The whispers are getting louder now, and I can feel the symbols burning on my forehead even though I can't see them. Soon, very soon, I'll walk into the forest one last time. I'll find the clearing and the tree and all the people who are waiting for me there. And I'll take my place among them. Another lost soul feeding the hunger of the Whispering Woods, helping them grow strong enough to reach beyond the park boundaries, to spread into the cities and towns where more people wait to be found. The woods are patient, but they're also hungry, and I can hear them calling my name. My name is Sarah Mitchell, and I am 34 years old. I've been a park ranger at Olympic National Park for 11 years. This happened during the fall of 2023, when the missing person case of Emma Collins turned into something that still haunts me. The radio crackled to life at 4:47 p.m., just as the October sun was beginning its rapid descent behind the towering evergreens of the Hoh rainforest. I was finishing my routine patrol near the visitor center when dispatch came through with that tone every ranger dreads. Calm, professional, but carrying an undercurrent of urgency that sets your teeth on edge. Ranger Mitchell, we have a missing person report. 23-year-old female Emma Collins failed to return from the Solduke Hot Springs Trail. Last seen this morning at 8 a.m. by campground host. Vehicle still in parking lot. I keyed my radio, feeling the familiar weight of responsibility settle on my shoulders like a lead blanket. Copy that, dispatch. Any companions? Emergency contacts? Negative on companions. Parents contacted driving up from Portland. ETA 3 hours. The temperature was dropping fast, and I could see my breath forming small clouds in the increasingly frigid air. October in the Olympics was treacherous. Warm enough during the day to lull hikers into complacency, but brutal once the sun disappeared. The trees around me creaked and groaned in the wind, their branches heavy with the dying leaves that carpeted the forest floor in a thick layer of rust and gold. I grabbed my emergency pack and headed toward the Solduke area, my boots crunching through the fallen leaves. The trail to the hot springs was well maintained and relatively easy, but it wound through dense old-growth forest, where visibility dropped to mere yards in places. Perfect for someone to get turned around, especially with the early darkness that fall brought to the Pacific Northwest. As I drove the winding road toward Solduke, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Not just the usual concern for a missing hiker, but something deeper. The forest seemed too quiet, even for this time of year. The usual chorus of birds had fallen silent, and the only sound was the whisper of wind through the towering Douglas firs and western red cedars. I'd handled dozens of missing person cases over the years. Most ended with embarrassed but grateful hikers who'd simply lost track of time or taken a wrong turn. But there had been others, the ones that stayed with you, that made you question what you really knew about the wilderness you'd sworn to protect. 3 years ago, there was Marcus Webb. We found him after 4 days, sitting by a stream 2 miles off any marked trail, staring into the water with wide, unblinking eyes. He couldn't remember how he'd gotten there, couldn't remember the past 3 days. Just kept whispering about the woman in white who'd led him through the forest. The doctors said dehydration and hypothermia could cause hallucinations, but Marcus's eyes told a different story. Then there was the Henderson family last summer. Found their 7-year-old daughter, Lucy, sitting in a clearing we'd searched twice before. She was clean, well-fed, and claimed a nice lady had been taking care of her. But when we asked her to describe this woman, Lucy would only draw pictures of empty dresses hanging in trees. I shook off the memories as I pulled into the Solduke parking area. Emma's blue Honda Civic sat alone in the lot, keys still in the ignition. I approached carefully, noting the driver's side door was unlocked. Her purse was on the passenger seat, wallet and phone still inside. A day pack was gone from the back seat. You could see the outline in the dust. I radioed in my findings and began examining the trailhead. The Solduke Hot Springs Trail was clearly marked, but as I studied the ground, I noticed something odd. There were fresh footprints heading toward the trail, but they seemed wrong somehow. The stride was too long, the impressions too deep for someone Emma's size. And there were other prints beside them, smaller, more consistent with a woman's hiking boots. But the smaller prints stopped abruptly about 50 yards up the trail. I keyed my radio again. Dispatch, I'm beginning trail search. Request backup and search dog if available. Copy that, Mitchell. K9 unit is 2 hours out. Ranger Thompson en route to assist. The forest closed around me as I followed the trail deeper into the old growth. Massive trees towered overhead, their trunks disappearing into the gathering gloom. The air grew thick with the scent of moss and decay, that distinctive smell of the Pacific Northwest rainforest that usually comforted me but now seemed oppressive. My flashlight beam cut through the increasing darkness, illuminating patches of trail markers and the occasional glimpse of footprints. The wrong footprints were still there, but they seemed to be changing as I followed them. Sometimes they looked like hiking boots, sometimes like bare feet, and once, I must have been seeing things, they looked almost like hooves. "Emma," I called out, my voice echoing strangely in the dense forest. "Emma Collins, park ranger." No response except the whisper of wind through the canopy and the distant sound of rushing water from Solduke Creek. I'd been hiking for about an hour when I came across the first piece of evidence. A red wool hat hanging from a branch about 8 feet off the ground. Too high for someone to have just dropped it, but not high enough to have been blown there by wind. I photographed it in place before carefully removing it, noting the way it had been arranged almost deliberately on the branch. "Dispatch, I've found what appears to be a piece of clothing belonging to the missing person. Red knit hat, approximately 1 mile up the Solduke Trail." "Copy that, Mitchell. Any sign of the subject?" "Negative. Continuing search." As I pushed deeper into the forest, the trail began to feel different. The well-maintained path seemed to be deteriorating, becoming narrower and more overgrown. But that was impossible. I'd hiked this trail dozens of times. It didn't change. My radio crackled with static, then went silent. I tried to raise dispatch but got nothing except white noise. The GPS on my phone showed my location as a gray void, no signal available. The forest around me had gone completely silent. I stopped walking and listened, every sense straining against the unnatural quiet. No bird calls, no rustle of small animals in the underbrush, no distant sound of water. Even the wind had died to nothing. It was as if the forest itself was holding its breath. That's when I heard it. A soft voice, barely audible, coming from somewhere ahead on the trail. "Help me." I quickened my pace, flashlight sweeping left and right. "Emma? Emma, is that you? Please, help me." The voice was definitely female, weak and desperate. I broke into a run, my boots pounding on the trail as I followed the sound. But as I ran, I began to notice that the voice wasn't getting any closer. If anything, it seemed to be receding, always just beyond the reach of my flashlight beam. "Emma, stay where you are. I'm coming to you." I ran for what felt like miles, but when I stopped to catch my breath, I realized I was in a part of the forest I didn't recognize. The trees were different here, older, more twisted, with gnarled branches that seemed to reach toward me like arthritic fingers. The ground beneath my feet was spongy and gave off a sickly, sweet smell of rot. My flashlight flickered, dimmed, then went out completely. I fumbled for my backup light, hands shaking as I tried to locate it in my pack. The darkness around me was absolute, pressing in from all sides like a living thing. I could hear something moving in the trees above me, a rustling that sounded almost like whispered conversation. When I finally got my backup light working, I nearly screamed. Emma Collins was standing 20 feet away, perfectly still, staring at me with eyes that reflected the light like an animal's. She was wearing the same hiking clothes described in the missing person report, but something was wrong with her. Her skin had a grayish pallor, and her hair hung in limp strands around her face. Most disturbing of all, she was smiling, a wide, unnatural grin that showed too many teeth. "Emma?" I called out, keeping my voice steady despite the fear crawling up my spine. "Are you injured? I'm here to help you." She didn't respond, just continued to stare at me with that horrible smile. I took a step forward, and she took a step back, maintaining the exact same distance between us. "Emma, I need you to talk to me. Your parents are worried sick. Can you tell me what happened to you?" This time she did respond, but the voice that came from her mouth wasn't the same one I'd been following. It was deeper, rougher, with an accent I couldn't place. "She's not here anymore," the voice said through Emma's lips. "She's with us now, deep in the roots and the dark places." I reached for my radio, but it was still dead. No static, no nothing. The silence was so complete I could hear my own heartbeat thundering in my ears. "Who are you?" I asked, surprised by how steady my voice sounded. The thing wearing Emma's face tilted its head at an angle that was wrong for human anatomy. "We are the first ones, the ones who were here before your trails and your signs and your rules, the ones who remember when the trees were young." I backed away slowly, trying to put distance between us while keeping my light trained on the creature. But as I moved, I realized there were other shapes in the darkness beyond the reach of my flashlight. Tall, thin figures that might have been trees, but moved with too much purpose. "What do you want?" I whispered. "The same thing we've always wanted," it replied. "To be left alone. But your kind keeps coming. Keep wandering off the safe paths. Keep looking for us." "I can leave," I said. "I'll go back. Report that we couldn't find her. No one else has to know." The Emma thing's grin widened impossibly. "But you've already seen us. You know we're here, and knowledge like that, it spreads. Like disease, like fire." That's when I noticed the smell, sweet and cloying, like flowers left too long in water. It was coming from Emma, or what had been Emma. As I watched in horror, her skin began to take on a greenish tint, and small mushrooms started sprouting from her hair. "The forest takes what it needs," she said, her voice now a chorus of whispers. "And it needs you to forget, to sleep, to join us in the deep places where the old rules still apply." I turned and ran. Behind me I could hear laughter, not just from Emma, but from dozens of voices echoing through the trees. The sound followed me as I crashed through the underbrush, branches tearing at my clothes and face. My flashlight beam bounced wildly, illuminating glimpses of the nightmare I was fleeing. Twisted trees with faces in their bark, mushrooms that pulsed with their own dim light, and always those tall figures moving just beyond the edge of visibility. I ran until my lungs burned and my legs gave out, finally collapsing against a massive cedar trunk. As I gasped for breath, I tried to get my bearings. The forest around me looked normal again. Familiar trails, recognizable landmarks. My radio crackled to life. "Mitchell, what's your status?" You've been radio silent for over an hour. I keyed the mic with shaking hands. Dispatch, I found evidence of the missing person but no sign of Emma Collins herself. Requesting immediate backup and full search team. Copy that. Search team is mobilizing. What's your location? I looked around, trying to orient myself. I'm not sure. GPS is down. I'll try to make my way back to the trailhead. But as I stood to leave, I saw something that made my blood run cold. There, carved into the bark of the cedar I'd been leaning against, was a message in Emma's handwriting. They're in the trees. Don't look up. I couldn't help myself. I looked up. The canopy above me was alive with movement. Dozens of figures clung to the branches like enormous insects. Their pale faces turned down toward me. They weren't quite human. Too tall, too thin, with fingers that bent in too many places. And in the center of them all, suspended from the highest branches like a grotesque Christmas ornament, was Emma Collins. The real Emma Collins. Her eyes were wide with terror, but she was alive. Mushrooms and moss had begun growing from her skin, and her mouth was covered with what looked like tree bark, but she was alive. She was trying to scream, trying to warn me, but no sound came out. One of the creatures dropped from the canopy, landing silently on the forest floor 20 feet away. It was wearing Emma's clothes, but its face was a shifting mass of bark and shadow. When it spoke, its voice was perfect mimicry of Emma's. "Thank you for coming to find me," it said with Emma's voice. "I've been waiting for you." More creatures began dropping from the trees, surrounding me in a circle. They all wore human faces, but none of them were quite right. Too many teeth. Eyes that were solid black, skin that moved like water. "The rules are simple," the Emma thing continued. "We take your shape, your memories, your life. We go back to your world and live among your people. And you stay here. You become part of the forest. Part of us." I drew my service weapon, though I doubted it would do much good against these things. "Why Emma? Why her?" "She wandered off the path," it replied. "She was looking for something, a story for her blog about supernatural encounters in national parks. She found what she was looking for." The circle of creatures began to close in, their movements unnaturally synchronized. I could feel something happening to my mind, a creeping lethargy that made my limbs feel heavy and my thoughts sluggish. The sweet smell was getting stronger, and I could see spores drifting through the air like snow. I forced myself to focus, to remember my training. I was a park ranger. I had sworn to protect the people who came to these wilderness areas, even if it meant sacrificing myself. I raised my weapon and fired 3 shots into the air, the international distress signal. The sound echoed through the forest, and the creatures recoiled as if physically struck. "The sound," I gasped, understanding flooding through me. "You can't stand loud noises." I pulled out my emergency whistle and blew it as hard as I could. The piercing shriek sent the creatures scrambling back into the trees, their forms becoming translucent and indistinct. The Emma thing let out a sound like wind through dead leaves and began to fade. "You cannot save her," it whispered as it dissolved. "She is ours now, and we will find you again." The real Emma fell from the canopy, her body hitting the ground with a sickening thud. I rushed to her side, checking for signs of life. She was breathing barely, but alive. The bark around her mouth had cracked, and she was trying to speak. Don't let them wear my face," she whispered, her voice barely audible. I gathered her in my arms and began the long journey back to the trailhead, blowing my whistle every few minutes to keep the creatures at bay. With each blast, I could hear them retreating deeper into the forest, but I knew they were still watching, still waiting. It took me 3 hours to carry Emma back to safety. The search team found us just as I reached the parking lot. My whistle finally falling silent from overuse, Emma was rushed to the hospital, where she spent 2 weeks in intensive care. The doctors said she was suffering from severe dehydration and exposure, with an unusual fungal infection that took months to clear up. She never spoke publicly about what happened to her in the forest. When asked by investigators, she would only say that she got lost and couldn't remember anything else. But I knew better. I could see it in her eyes. The same haunted look that Marcus Webb had, the same knowledge that some things were better left forgotten. The official report listed it as a successful search and rescue operation. Emma Collins had wandered off the trail, become disoriented, and spent 36 hours lost in the forest before being found by a park ranger. End of story. But I knew the truth, and the truth was that something ancient and hungry lived in the deep places of Olympic National Park, something that had been there long before humans ever set foot in these forests. Something that was patient and clever and always looking for new faces to wear. I transferred to a different district 6 months later, but it didn't matter. The forest has a long memory and it doesn't forget. Even now, 3 years later, I still hear them sometimes when I'm alone in the wilderness. Whispers in the wind, footsteps that don't belong to any living thing, and always that sweet cloying smell that means they're getting close. Just last week, I got a call from a fellow ranger about a missing hiker in the Ho rainforest. 24-year-old male David Chen failed to return from an overnight camping trip. His tent was found undisturbed, but he was nowhere to be found. They found him 2 days later, sitting by the same stream where we'd found Marcus Webb. He was clean, well-fed, and claimed he'd been cared for by a nice lady who looked exactly like Emma Collins. But Emma Collins lives in Portland now, works at a coffee shop, and hasn't been back to Olympic National Park since that night in the forest. I know because I check on her every few months just to make sure she's still herself. The thing is, David Chen's description was perfect. Every detail matched Emma exactly, down to the scar on her left hand from a childhood accident, the same scar I'd seen on the creature that had worn her face in the forest. They're still out there, wearing the faces of the people they've taken, walking among us, learning our ways, perfecting their disguises. And every missing person case, every hiker who wanders off the trail and is never seen again might be feeding their numbers. I still do my job. I still search for the lost and the missing. But now I carry more than just emergency supplies and medical equipment. I carry salt, iron nails, and a whistle that never leaves my side. And I never ever go into the deep forest alone. Because I know that somewhere in the shadows between the trees, something that looks exactly like Emma Collins is waiting for me to lower my guard, waiting for the chance to finish what it started that night in the forest. And sometimes, late at night when the wind is blowing through the trees just right, I can hear it calling my name with her voice, asking me to come back and play. The forest never forgets, and it never forgives.